Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen here with life coach Cindie Chavez. Today is Wednesday. It is July the 24th, 2019. Happy Neville Day, everybody. It is 4 p.m. in New York, 1 p.m. in Los Angeles, 9 p.m. in London, and that would make it, I believe, 9 a.m. in Tokyo and 10 a.m. in Sydney. I could be wrong. Oh, no, I think it's actually 5 a.m. in Tokyo and 6 a.m. in Sydney. Right. Sometimes the math, throws me a little bit.
It's 3 p.m. in New Orleans.
It's 3 p.m. in New Orleans. That's right. But wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining us for another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And I'm happy that we're off to the finishing conclusion of Chapter 1 and starting out with Chapter 2 of The Law and the Promise by Neville Goddard. This is his magnum opus. This is the one that kind of summarized everything that he spent, 4 decades telling people about.
Right.
That's quite just the 4 decades. That's quite an accomplishment all by itself. But then you add the book on top of it, and it's like this is pretty important stuff, and it's the stuff that I think most Neville followers really pay the closest attention to, right?
I would think so, yeah, because I've noticed as we've gone through many Neville books that his message has evolved, his methods have evolved, his teaching style, and of course that would be true of any of us,
Sure.
I mean, hopefully, because
we're growing.
Right, we're growing. So I think it's interesting to see, and that was kind of my intention going into this book, was I looked at the list and I thought, this is his last book or one of the latest books in the collection I have anyway.
Right.
And that I want to see where he's gotten to and, where he landed.
Yeah.
And so it's been fun. And of course, this book also contains some stories, real stories from people that followed Neville when he was alive teaching and used his methods and wrote letters to him. And I always think that that's so inspiring to hear how other people, use these methods. I know I had a message over the weekend from someone that is a podcast listener and
oh, nice.
And said that they were going through some tough times right now, but that in the future they wanted me to help them Neville'ize their life. And I so cute. Yeah. So I was like, I'm ready. Let's do it.
All right. Let the Nevilleizing begin.
Oh, and before we start, I know you probably have announcements also, but I want to congratulate you on the first episode of The Grass is Greener audio play. It went live Friday night and was live streamed, and I listened to it live, and I thought it was so exciting. I screamed at the end when the kind of reveal happened.
Right. It was kind of revealing, too.
Like, why didn't I see it coming? But it was like, oh, my goodness.
Oh, well, I'm going to tell Alex that. That means we did a good job writing it, because you're a life coach. You didn't see it coming. Like, oh, wow, we did pretty well then. We were able to keep the veil over for quite some time. That's pretty cool.
Right. Really should have seen it coming, but it was great. I enjoyed it so much. I'm looking forward to the next episode.
We are too. I know Alex has completed the first draft of the script for the second episode. I actually have not even had a chance to look at it. I'm sorry to say. I've been dealing with other stuff with Louise's business and just recovering from episode 1. When we put into the little promo at the end that we took nearly 600 hours to do the thing, I did about half of those hours. And I did a lot of them in the last couple of days just leading up to the launch. So by the time that came around, I was like, I don't know if you could tell on the video, I wasn't a nervous wreck. I was what's the word? It was almost like having a nervous breakdown. I was like wrung out. I was wrung out like a wet rat. I was just wiped. And Saturday, the only thing I did Saturday was I had an eye doctor appointment, which I'm going to tell you a story about. And that was it. I couldn't handle anything else on Saturday. I was so tired.
Yeah, well, I know you said at the end, you said, I'm exhausted. And I thought to myself, well, I would be too, because I knew how much went into this project. It was just
a lot has gone in. And plus, we were making up so much that, some of the ways that we went about doing this, you can't go look up on Google. It's just, you have to invent it as you're going along. And you don't really know what's going to happen as you're doing it. You have some idea. Fortunately, from doing the podcast, I have some idea of how Zoom works and what kind of limitations there are and so forth. But even with that, I was learning stuff. One of the things that I learned, I was telling, I think I mentioned it even on the post part of the show on Friday. I can't remember if it was during the show or afterward. But while I was mixing together the sound, because there's all these little clips that I'm putting together to make the full episode. While I'm mixing them together, I'm thinking to myself, why is it that all the women's voices sound so flat? I mean, they were almost garbled at times.
Because Zoom filters out the highs.
Zoom filters out the highs.
Right.
And I said, oh my God, I never thought of that. Because that's how they do a lot of their noise reduction. So I had to actually fake putting back in the highs so they would sound like something. And it actually did sound like something, which was good. So you could always understand what the different characters were saying. But it taught me something. And the first thing I did after that, after I recovered from Saturday, that is, was contact Zoom and ask them, how do I turn the filtering off? It's killing this podcast we're putting together. And I think I have a solution already. But that's the way the whole project has been. Finding out what the limitations are and then figuring out how do you get around them. And you always find out the hard way. It's like, oh, God, we just did this whole recording session and none of it's any good. Oh, no.
All the things we learn by trial and error, right?
Right. Exactly. That's what it is. But it's all good. The first episode did come out well. Alex and I are now actually planning a post-release advertising campaign because we want to reach a lot of people and see if we can get a lot of listeners joining in early on the series. I'm sure people will, join in as the series grows. But, yeah, it's exciting. It's good stuff. Yeah. And I told you I had a story to tell from Saturday. I forgot to tell it yesterday. And Monday, Louis couldn't make the Monday podcast, so we canceled Monday. But Saturday, I had the eye doctor appointment. And I think, for about 10 years now, I've had macular degeneration. My left eye, I have no straight ahead vision. I can only see in my right eye straight ahead.
Right.
And when that first happened, I was actually in a place in my life where I had no money. I had dim job prospects. I mean, everything was just going very badly. And then all of a sudden I have an eyesight issue. And this is like not a happy thing, right?
Right.
Well, it's also around the time that I started discovering law of attraction. And so I said, well, I have actually done other things. And over the years, I have learned other things, different ways to apply it to healing my body. I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to heal my eyes. I don't have no idea how it's going to happen. All the doctors tell me macular degeneration never gets better. Never, ever. The most you can do is keep it from getting worse, which is really bad from an LOA perspective. And yeah, I wasn't sure how to do it. I just figured, somehow I'm going to put it out there that my eyes are going to get better. Well, went to the eye doctor. Now, 10 years ago, they used the camera and took the picture of the eyeballs, and that's how they knew that I had this macular degeneration thing. And I saw those photos. Since then, they have developed, actually around that time, they developed a new technology that electronically scans your eyeballs called an optomat.
Yep, I just had that done.
You just had that done, okay. And I had never had that, interestingly enough, because it turns out most eye doctors are rather resistant to technology like most other folks are. So they didn't really want to accept it. Now they're finally accepting it, apparently because it captures a part of the eyeball that the old method doesn't capture. So that's kind of like the inroad that allowed it to gain some acceptance. They still want you to do the old-fashioned one, too. They want you to pay twice as much. But nevertheless, there's some acceptance for it. But anyway, I had it done that way, and I saw on the screen what my eyeballs looked like. Now, 10 years ago, there are two varieties of macular degeneration. One's called dry, one's called wet. And as you might imagine, wet is where there's a lot of blood. I have the wet variety. To make matters even worse, the wet variety has an even worse prognosis for somebody in terms of the likelihood of going blind. Ooh. So that just kind of added to my nervousness, shall we say, because I didn't want to go blind, But I also knew I had no power over it, other than I could take these vitamins that would help the dry version, but not the wet version. But I've been taking the vitamins anyway all this time. And my vision has stayed stable throughout the 10-year period. So I still have good straight ahead vision in my right eye. Well, I took a look at the optomat thing on Saturday, and you can still see signs of macular degeneration, but all the blood is gone, or most of it anyway. And she told me, you have one of the most unusual forms of macular degeneration I've ever seen. I said, why? She says, well, I'll show you when I show you the scan. So she shows me the scan, and on my left eye, you can see this jagged scar going across the middle of it. She says, you had a detached retina.
Oh.
And I said, I didn't know that. Apparently, I had it at that time 10 years ago, and they didn't detect it. They didn't realize it was a detached retina. and it healed itself naturally. That's what the scar tissue is. And she tells me that the eye can do that over time. It takes a very, very long time for it to heal, but my eye did that. So what you see now, instead of this huge red blob, which was all the blood from that detached retina, you just see the scar going across. Now, I still have loss of vision there. I don't have that straight ahead vision there. But I'm looking at this scan, and I'm comparing it in my mind to what I remember, 10 years ago. It was a significant improvement. And I just thought, well, that's really cool. Now, do I have the vision? No, I don't have the vision. Can I point to anything that was a measurable difference? Well, no, I couldn't. But I know it was like an intangible thing. I could just see it on the scan that it looked like a better scan. So I felt good about that. And then I got home and I thought to myself, I wonder how my new prescription compares to my old prescription. So I pulled out the old prescription, compared it to the new one, and found that my new prescription is better eyesight. I've actually improved, something you're not supposed to be able to do. Your eyes get worse over time. They don't get better. My eyes got better. Not a lot, not by a dramatic amount, but, where there was like a power of 250, the power got reduced to 225, or 350 got reduced to 3, that kind of thing.
Right.
Damn, this stuff works. This stuff really works.
This reminds me of, we talk about this all the time, of the metaphor that we use of, and Neville uses all the time, of planting seeds, right? And holding the vision for something that's
literally,
but for something that we don't see yet. And how we always talk about, you plant the seeds and you keep watering, like you keep up with your affirmations and your vitamins that you're taking that help that, right? And you're watering and you're letting the sun get on the seeds, and nothing's happening. And it's so not true that nothing's happening. We haven't seen a sprout yet. We haven't seen a flower yet, but all kinds of things are happening. And that's the thing. When on the outward surface, it seems like we're not seeing results. It seems like nothing's changing. This is what we remember, that something has changed, and you've got evidence of it now.
Yep.
And up until the time that you saw those scans, you may have felt like, I'm just holding steady. Nothing's changing.
Well, I can even go a step further than that. I can point out that during that 10-year period, there were numerous times where I just doubted completely that any of this stuff was going to really help my eyes. And I was in a really bad vibrational point. And there were other times where I would get myself into a good vibrational place. Right. So my point is, I was like riding waves. Yes. Sometimes I would feel good about it. Sometimes I feel bad about it. Good, bad. And so there was this, it wasn't like it was a clean cut, I feel good for 10 years. It was this mixed up mess of emotions.
That's how it always is.
And that's the point.
Right. Yes. I told you a story before we started the podcast today, and I wrote to my list today because I wanted to encourage them, because I saw something happen. And that was that yesterday I spent all day from the time I woke up until about 4:30 in the afternoon working on a room in my house, the second bedroom, that was kind of become a catch-all for every miscellaneous thing that doesn't have a real place to go.
We all know what that's like too. You have like a closet or a room or something that just captures everything.
Well, I live in like a almost 100-year-old cottage, and back then closets were taxed. So there's hardly any storage space. And so I just decided I'm going to tackle this room. And I rearranged everything. I packed up stuff in boxes. I threw a ton of stuff away. I deep cleaned the room, and it's beautiful now. It's open and lovely and amazing. When my husband came home, I said, first I told him what happened right prior to him getting home. But then I said, come look at the room. And when he saw it, he said, I just can't believe it. I can't believe this happened in one day with it was amazing. But when I got done, I was like, okay, I had something else I had to be doing around 5:30, and I thought, I just want to sit down for 5 minutes and have a cup of tea. And I made a cup of tea. I was exhausted but very, very happy with my project. I made a cup of tea, and it was boiling, and somehow it dumped out of the cup all over my torso.
Ouch.
And I probably can say I don't recall ever burning myself where it hurt this bad. And for the rest of the evening, it just took away all my joy. Even after I took care of it, I had ice on it. It started not hurting so much. I put some other stuff on it, and, I was taking care of it. I realized all of a sudden that my self-talk that's sort of behind the scenes, it wasn't even really conscious. Those gremlin voices were saying to me, how stupid, you know how to drink a cup of tea. You just dump tea all over yourself. It was just like in the background. It's like, you just ruined your whole evening,
Oh.
And I tell you what I did is when I recognized that my vibration was so low that I was just really beating myself up for this little accident. Thank goodness it wasn't worse, right? I just made sure that I gave myself the other self-talk, the conscious self-talk.
Yeah.
I said, you're doing the best you can. You did a fantastic job today. You spilled a cup of tea. Thankfully, you're not burned any worse. You are loved, right? It's okay. Everything's going to be all right. And I was able to turn it around. After a good night's sleep, I woke up this morning and feeling much better. But boy, can we lose sight of a big accomplishment just because we have a small disappointment or
Absolutely.
An accident or something else things turn around and suddenly they're not exactly going our way. And we can completely just discount some big success that we had, right? And that's what I was doing. So when I hear your story about 10 years, of course you weren't flying.
Of course.
And when you're not seeing, if you're not detecting, I guess is a better word, any improvement, it's not a wonder that sometimes we don't get doubtful and we start, thinking that we're not having success. But how exciting that you actually had the proof and the evidence. It seems to me like that energy right before the sprouts come up. Like I wouldn't be surprised if you didn't start seeing improvement and detecting it and perceiving it, experiencing it, like very soon, because it seems to me you're right there.
I agree. Yeah. In fact, I'll even go a step further because they told me 10 years ago, and they still say it today, that, 10 years ago, they thought it was age-related macular degeneration. And age-related...
You are getting younger, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's part of my goal. Right. I'm still trying to figure out a way to measure that one. But, they told me that age-related macular degeneration is one of those things that will inevitably lead to blindness. Well, I kind of like, dug my heels into the ground, like, hell no, I'm not going to go blind. I refuse. I'm going to do whatever it takes. I have no idea how to accomplish this, but somehow I'm going to maintain my sight. So as the years went on and I'm taking the vitamins, I'm religious about it. I never miss a day. Every single day I take my 2 vitamins every single day without fail. If there have been times where I've been on vacation and forgot to bring the vitamins, and I would insist, we got to go find a drugstore so I can buy the vitamins so I can I would get manic about it because I needed to have those vitamins. Now, did I actually need them every single day? Probably not. I had a good amount going on in my bloodstream, but I was determined to be very specific about that. And as time went on and my eyesight in my right eye was stable, I thought to myself, I'm beating the odds. I'm beating the odds. I'm beating the odds. To the point where this is really interesting. The eye doctor I saw on Saturday was a different one from the one I saw 10 years ago. And she said to me 2 things. She said to me 3 things. First of all, she said, macular degeneration never gets better. This is the same message I've been getting all along. Right. Second thing she told me is, well, it's pretty clear you don't have age-related macular degeneration. You can just hear the wheels turning. Like, I got to find a medical way to justify what this patient is experiencing. Right.
And history tells us that we've had so many times throughout history where the opinion was this never does that.
Right.
And then we're proven wrong because things change, and it's like, reminds me of the 4-minute mile, right? Nobody did the 4-minute mile. And then as soon as someone did it, people started doing it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So now we know that all types of macular problems can heal themselves, right?
Yes, they can. They can. Now, do I have enough evidence here from medical science that come to that conclusion? I don't think so. I suspect that they're going to, even if I get to the point, even if I were to actually heal from this, they will consider it to be an anomaly because it doesn't fit their model. But that doesn't matter
or they
because
can say
I know.
You were misdiagnosed to begin with.
All these
things that we can say to make it diminish the miracle. But
that's right.
What we know is that miracles happen every day.
Mm.
right?
They certainly do. And that's really, to me, the exciting thing here. I mean, before I would go through the motions of trying to believe, that I feel better in my eyes. I assumed the feeling of the wish fulfilled, as Neville would say it, and I would assume that I was feeling better, assume that I was seeing better, and I'd appreciate my eyesight. Now I take my daily walks, and I could see the blue sky, and I can see the yellow sun. Although I try not to look at that too much, and I see the green trees, and I see the animals, and everything's brilliant color, and I'm loving it. I would do that a lot. Did I know that it was actually accomplishing anything? Not really, but I kept doing it anyway. And every year I maintained my level of eyesight, and every year I said to myself, I got another year. I beat him another year. I beat him another year.
Oh, it's so wonderful and so important. Such an important lesson for all of us to really hyper focus on things and get that focus going to where we can hold on to it, whether or not we're seeing or experiencing the results we want right away.
That's right. Yeah. And plus, now that I actually also saw that my prescription numbers went down,
yes,
which is not supposed to happen. Now I realize, well, it's not that I realize it. It's like I have a reinforced belief level. Right. Like now I know when I'm doing the affirmations, when I'm doing the assuming the feeling part, it really is having an effect. I can believe that better. Definitely. And that believing better makes a difference, I think.
Oh, my goodness. Yes. And then that's where you start to build the momentum.
Right.
That's why learning how to see some results when they happen, because believe it or not, some people will affirm for certain things and use every tool in their toolbox, in their metaphorical toolbox, and then the things are actually happening and they're still not seeing them.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So it's like having eyes to see even the smallest thing. You're seeing it now. Just your eyes have gotten better.
I know. I can't believe it, but it's great.
Well, I guess we should dive into Neville, but I'm so glad you told the story because
me too.
That inspires me.
And by the way, I should also take the moment to do what we said we were going to do, which was to do our promos. So if you aren't yet convinced that every show is different and you get new information every time, just consider what happened over the last 20 minutes or so, and you'll see it's different every single show. And most of the people who do listen actually are subscribers. I don't know if I told you, about 85 to 90% of our listeners are subscribers, according to the data that we get. But we want the other 10 to 15 to join as well. We want 100%. So if you're not yet a subscriber, please go to the homepage of our website, loatoday.net, and right at the top of the page, you will see instructions on how to use your particular device to basically install whatever software is needed, or if you already have the software, you just subscribe. And it's like a 30-second process at the most. And once you're done, then, of course, you want to share the fact with others that you've subscribed so they can get their daily doses of happy. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube, by the way. Just go to YouTube and do a search on LOA Today podcast videos. Subscribe there. Click the little bell so you get notified whenever we're live streaming. And that way you can actually see us because, a podcast by definition is audio only. But with YouTube, you get to see us too. So you can see what we look like as we're talking every time. And you can actually join us like Jeffrey has. Jeffrey's one of our regulars, and he's joined into the conversation. He says he's loving the conversation. Thank you for being part of the Synchronicity channel. That's a nice line. I like that.
I love that.
So, feel free to join us on the live streams too. We'd love to have that. But whatever you do, make sure you become a subscriber because we want more and more of you to get your daily dose of happy and, start applying and maybe even sharing your particular miracles that you have.
Yes.
Good fun.
Love that. Yeah. All right. Well, we have begun a new Neville book, The Law of Home. And we dove into the first chapter last week, but we didn't quite make it to the end of the first chapter. So we're going to try to cover the end of the first chapter today and possibly start on chapter 2. That's my hope anyway.
That's our pattern. We usually do things like that.
So I'm going to start at this point. It's a little, making a little backtrack from where we left off, just a little tiny bit. But I think it's so important because of what we just talked about. Mm-hmm. And it says faith is believing what is unbelievable. So when the doctor says no one ever heals from this,
right?
That is something that's unbelievable, right? I mean, saying that the doctor's saying it's not believable,
right?
It wouldn't be believable if this happened because no one does this. And faith is saying, well, we'll see.
I got to tell you one more piece about the story as you're saying that it reminded me of this other thing. At one point, she's telling me about the detached retina, and she's telling me about macular degeneration not getting better and all that kind of stuff. And I look at her with a smile on my face, and she gives me this quizzical look. I say, I know this sounds weird, but I'm looking at the scan, and it's making me feel good. And it was almost like she was trying to figure out whether I was insane or what. But I wasn't buying into all the craziness.
Was this the same eye doctor who
same eye doctor?
Previous scan? Okay.
Yeah. And she was just kind of mind blown that I was looking at a situation. I mean, she was telling me about all, how the eyeball can die and all these terrible things can happen. I'm looking at the scan and I was saying, wow, this is great news.
Right.
She was probably looking for the guys with the white jackets. I just had to mention that one.
Well, because sometimes when we're believing the unbelievable, people that are skeptical of that might think we look like we need those guys to come get us.
Absolutely.
Commit yourself to the feeling of the wish fulfilled in faith that this act of self-commission will become a reality. So that's the part of faith right there, is committing ourselves to feeling the wish fulfilled, knowing that this act of faith is going to become a reality. And it must become a reality because imagining creates reality. Imagination is both conservative and transformative. It is conservative when it builds its world from images supplied by memory and the evidence of the senses. It is creatively transformative when it imagines things as they ought to be, building its world out of the generous dreams of fancy. In the procession of images, the ones that take precedence naturally are those of the senses. Nevertheless, a present sense impression is only an image. It does not differ in nature from a memory image or the image of a wish. What makes a present sense impression so objectively real is the individual's imagination functioning in it and thinking from it. Whereas in a memory image or a wish, the individual's imagination is not functioning in it and thinking from it, but is functioning out of it and thinking of it. Now, that paragraph sounds a little confusing.
It is.
I always like to remind us of what he's actually saying. And sometimes if you ask someone if they have a meditation and they're picturing themselves in the meditation doing a certain thing, like sometimes a guided meditation will have you walking along a path or whatever. And the question is always, are you up in the sky or way back in the distance watching yourself go down that path like I'm watching a movie? That's thinking from it, or thinking not in it, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Functioning out of it, thinking of it. Or are you feeling yourself in your body, walking down the path, feeling your feet taking steps on the ground, looking around through your own eyes and seeing what's around you, not like a movie, but like you're in your body. And that's what Neville's talking about here. That's the sense impression that he says is creative and starts to make a difference. And
so makes sense.
It's important that if you're going to use Neville's methods and consciously use your imagination, that when you do that, you are experiencing the imaginal scene with you in your body, so to speak, right? So instead of like watching yourself on a movie, you're actually sitting in the chair with your hands on the table. I always say that because I can really get that when my eyes are closed and I'm imagining. Neville uses the example of reaching out and grabbing the sides of a ladder, like you're going to climb it. You feel the ladder in your hand instead of just looking at a distance. So he says if you would enter into the image in your imagination, then would you know what it is to be creatively transformative. Then would you realize your wish, and then you would be happy. Every image can be embodied, but unless you yourself enter the image and think from it, it is incapable of birth. Therefore, it's the height of folly to expect the wish to be realized by the mere passage of time. That which requires imaginative occupancy to produce its effect obviously cannot be affected without such occupancy. You cannot be in one image and not suffer the consequences of not being in another. Now he's talking there, I think, about identity, right? I mean, when you're picturing yourself in a certain place or in a certain position that you want, then it's sort of like saying you can't be in two places at once.
I think that's it. Yeah, because the negatives, he's got so many negatives going on there. It's hard to know what the positive is.
Right, right. So he says, imagination.
Before you go forward, I want to mention one other thing about this. This whole idea about being in it rather than being of it. I spent a large portion of my life thinking about life in a position of it, the outside position. And whenever I would interact with people, I would interact as if I was outside the interaction with people. And whenever I did an activity, I acted as if I was outside the activity. I had bought into this idea you always have to maintain this objective viewpoint.
So are you saying that was there a sense of not really being fully present?
I think a lot of people would describe it that way. That's not the way it seemed to me, but I think that would be an accurate way of describing it. From my perception, from my perspective, it seemed like I was just being an objective viewer. I was not being judgmental. I was simply sitting back and watching and observing what happened and learning from what would happen like a scientist would. It was a very scientific, detached way of looking at things.
I think that that's a very positive way to live a lot of the time. And I say that because there's a difference between a response and a reaction. And the conscious thing is to be able to respond to situations. Mm-hmm. Right? Yesterday, when I dumped a boiling cup of water on my midsection, I reacted.
Oh yeah, not surprisingly. With
a big scream.
Yeah.
So there's definitely a reaction. But when it comes to emotional things, which life is emotional, a lot of times we react, and then later we look back at our reaction and we wish we could go back and change it, right? So we want to be able to be conscious enough to have a response. And I think the thing that helps us do that is to be able to do what I think you're talking about, and that is to be able to not physically move backwards, but energetically to kind of step back into the place of observer, where you're observing everything that's going on instead of getting emotionally entangled in it right away, right? It doesn't mean you never have emotions. Mm-hmm. But so when I hear you say that, I'm like, well, that's not such a bad thing.
Well, here's the rub, because I think what you're saying is accurate. I think there is a lot of value in it, but there's also a risk side to it. The risk side is you don't actively go into the participant mode. You stay in the observer mode.
So the risk is to be more detached than
perpetually detached.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when you do that, and then you start engaging and involving yourself in learning about things like law of attraction and being a deliberate creator, and now you're wanting to learn how to, assume the feeling of the wish fulfilled and get into that feeling place and do the imagining and so forth. Now all of a sudden you're stuck because you're so used to doing it from the objective observer viewpoint that you've almost forgotten what it's like to be the participant. And that's actually what I had to spend a lot of time over the last 10 years kind of relearning how to be the participant. So I really appreciate what Neville's talking about in terms of how important it is to be part of it, to be part of the scene, to be involved in the scene, to be a participant in the scene. Because when you have lived outside of the scene so long and you've kind of forgotten how to do that, boy, that become really important. It's like, oh wow, I can just so much see how important that is. And then to have actually relearned it again, I really value it a lot. So I agree with you. You're right. There is value in having that objective perspective, but boy, do I also now value being able to be just immersed in what's going on.
Well, what I think is great about what you're talking about is that you had a lot of time to develop that ability to be the observer, mm-hmm. right? And so now you can actually use that to your benefit as you're learning how to come into the connective part where you're mm-hmm. not just the observer, but where you're actually, connecting. So, okay, so here's what Neville goes on to say. Imagination is spiritual sensation. Enter the image of the wish fulfilled and then give it sensory vividness and tones of reality by mentally acting as you would act if it were a physical fact. Now, this is what I mean by spiritual sensation. Imagine that you're holding a rose in your hand. Smell it. Do you detect the odor of roses? Well, if the rose is not there, why is its fragrance in the air? through spiritual sensation, that is, through imaginal sight, sound, scent, taste, and touch, you can give to the image sensory vividness. If you do this, all things will conspire to aid your harvesting, and upon reflection, you will see how subtle were the threads that led to your goal. You can never have devised the means which your imaginal activity employed to fulfill itself. I like to think about this idea. He is using all of the senses. And I've done this before with just imagining the taste of something that I really like to taste, right? Like chocolate or cheesecake or wine or something that I'm familiar with the taste of. And I really can enjoy tasting that chocolate or whatever without it being anywhere near me. And I've thought about that so much that when people will stop eating certain things because maybe they're trying to lose weight or they're trying to lay off the sugar or whatever, and so they'll stop and then feel really bad about it, right? Like, oh, I wish I could have that. Everybody's eating this birthday cake and I've not eaten it. And I often think to myself, if I really want to, I can sit here, close my eyes, and I can just enjoy a whole piece of cake without ever eating the cake. Because in my mind, it's sort of like the same faculty in our mind that creates experiences when we're asleep dreaming. Right? Like, have you ever dreamt of something and then woken up and thought, oh my gosh, that was so real? Mm-hmm. Like, I remember you telling me of having a dream after your father passed away that you hugged him and that it was so real, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like your body is like, I felt that hug, right?
Yes.
Like, or you wake up and I remember one time the smell of roses was so strong in my room, like in my dream, that when I woke up I felt like I could still smell it. And of course there were no roses in my room, right?
Yeah.
This is the power that our imagination has.
That's right.
If we can tap into this, we can start creating in a much more powerful way. So,
and in fact, we create in a very powerful way all the time.
Yes.
What we're really trying to do is we're trying to gain conscious control of it.
Right, where we're creating the things we want to create.
That's right.
Correct. Neville says, if you long to escape from your present sense fixation, that's what you're talking about right now.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
To transform your present life into a dream of what might well be, you need but imagine that you are already what you want to be, and to feel the way you would expect to feel under such circumstances, like the make-believe of a child who is remaking the world after its own heart. Create your world out of pure dreams of fancy. Mentally enter into your dream. Mentally do what you would actually do were it physically true. You will discover that dreams are realized not by the rich, but by the imaginative. Nothing stands between you and the fulfillment of your dreams but facts. And facts are the creations of imagining. If you change your imagining, you will change the facts.
It's a startling thing. I mean, he says it very nicely there, and a lot of LOA scholars have said it in a number of different ways. But that's just every time I read it, no matter how I read it, in this particular form or any other, the idea that changing my imagination about a fact will change the fact there's something mind-blowing about that.
Yeah. And the funny thing I think of is, where it says nothing stands between you and the fulfillment of your dreams but facts.
Yeah.
I think of how many people say, but that's just the way it is.
Yeah, right.
Or here are the facts, right? I mean, you could have come home 10 years ago and said, well, the fact is I'm going to go blind.
And I would have probably gone blind.
I have macular degeneration. And the fact is that never heals. But you didn't do that.
No, I actually created a new term. I decided I had macular regeneration.
Right? You told me that before. I thought that was so great. But so that's the thing, is that a lot of times those facts that are standing in the way, those facts can be changed.
Yeah. How cool is that? That is just so cool. I get chills every time I think about that.
Man and his past are one continuous structure. The structure contains all of the facts which have been conserved and still operate below the threshold of his surface mind. For him, it is merely history. For him, it seems unalterable, a dead and firmly fixed past. But for itself, It is living. It is part of the living age. He cannot leave behind him the mistakes of the past, for nothing disappears. Everything that has been is still in existence. The past still exists, and it gives, and still gives, its results. Man must go back in memory, seek for, and destroy the causes of evil, however far back they lie. This going into the past and replaying a scene of the past in imagination as it ought to have been played the first time, I call revision. And revision results in repeal. Changing your life means changing the past. The causes of any present evil are the unrevised scenes of the past. The past and the present form the whole structure of man. They are carrying all of its contents with it. Any alteration of content will result in an alteration in the present and future.
Let's stop and look at that for a second.
This gets me really excited.
Yeah.
And actually, as I'm thinking about it right now, a couple of things came to mind that are personal things in my life that I thought, that happened recently that I thought, oh, I haven't done that with this yet. Because this is one of my favorite things to do, is to go back and reimagine a conversation, reimagine an event, and imagine that it happened differently. For instance, and this is one of the things that just came into my mind, is that I'm a little concerned that I'm going to have scarring from the burn incident yesterday.
Sure, yeah.
So I'm curious, if I go back and imagine that the incident played out differently, maybe there won't be, because
I think you're right.
Differently.
Yeah.
I had a conversation that I realized after the fact something I wish I would have said. So I will go back in my mind and replay that conversation differently with a different result. I've used that many times, and that
Really?
one was powerful. Yes, that one I have had the best results with.
Like, can you give an example, like, something that people could actually say, oh, yeah, I understand what she's talking about, real world?
Yeah. So you have a conversation with somebody, and I think that anybody can think about this, right? I remember coaching somebody one time, and they were very, very upset because of a conversation that they had had with, I'm not sure if it was an ex-partner or a partner, but it was somebody that they were wanting to be with, and they had a conversation, and they admitted to me that they said some things that, I asked them, well, if you could have the conversation again, would you have said those same things? No, I would never have said that. I was just really upset. And after the fact, I thought, oh, why didn't I say this? And so I gave them an assignment. I said, here's what I want you to do when you're falling asleep tonight, because I know that's one thing Neville always stresses.
Right.
And other times in the day, too. Whenever you think of that conversation, like narrow it down to the 3 or 4 sentences that you remember, because more often than not, there's a little part of that conversation that we keep playing in our mind. We keep playing what they said and what we said, and then what they said and what we said. Those little 4 sentences or so, right? And we regret what we said, and we feel the sting maybe of what they said, and it just was uncomfortable. So I said to them, well, what would you say if you had that conversation again? If you had the chance to go back and redo it, what would you say? And they said, well, I would say this. And they had another thing they would say. And I asked them, and what would you hope that they would have said back to you? And so they had a very nice reply, right? An understanding, loving reply, a forgiving reply. And so I said, I want you to just have that conversation. Not long, rambling 30 minutes, but just those 3 or 4 sentences. Just want you to imagine that. And I want you to feel in your body what you feel. Instead of that, gut-wrenching, jaw-clenching, awful, like, oh, this was so terrible, this conversation. I want you to feel what you would feel if it had gone the other way. And then let it go. So revise it. Feel that nice, comfortable feeling of somebody forgiving you and loving you, and of you loving them and everything going better. And then let it go. And I've actually had people come back and say, you won't believe what happened. Like, first of all, the charge went away. Then I could look back, and it just didn't really seem that bad anymore. Then I could look back at the conversation that I was having in my imagination, and I could really enjoy the feeling of it, of connection, of peacefulness, of love, of forgiveness. And then you know what happened? They called me and we had a great conversation.
Oh, wow. Now that's a nice result right there.
Right? And I've had the same thing happen. I'm not going to tell you that I've had it happen 100% of the time. Every time I've tried to revise something that, something's happened and the whole thing's turned around. But I will tell you that every time I've used this method to revise something, that I've had positive results. My vibration has shifted about it. I've been able to let go of it. If it was an emotional thing, it's not emotional anymore. The charge leaves from it. And that has results in the rest of your life, because our lives are holistic, right?
That's so important what you're saying there. So many people want to use the law of attraction or the Neville method or whatever you want to describe it as. They want to use it as a way to get somebody else to do something. They want to get a lover back. They want to get a friend back. They want to do whatever like that. And every time they look at it that way, sometimes they actually get it back. They get the person back and it's not working. They don't know what to do about it. Or sometimes they don't get the person back, but they always find some way to be disappointed about it. But what you point out is, don't even look at that part of it. Look at what it's doing for you. Right. That's where the victory is. And I think it's so important. Right, because I can't control and I don't want to control someone else's reactions, responses, actions, behaviors. That's on them. Believe me, I have enough going on being responsible for my own behavior. You and me both. Responsible for someone else's behavior. But if I can shift my own vibration and my own energy by being able to let go of things that have been bothering me, that's half the battle. Or that's gigantic right there. Battle, right? Yeah. Okay. Letting go of that stuff it's what we're really looking for. We don't necessarily realize it because we're trying to get that one person back or whatever. But what we're really doing is we're working on ourselves. And when we're working on ourselves and we're managing to shift ourselves in a significant way, then other things, these little synchronicities as we call them, start to happen. And, maybe I didn't get that one person back, but somebody new showed up in my life. Like, where the heck did they come from? Well, they came from me shifting who I was and what I was thinking on. Right, exactly. Yeah. Because, if you're going over a conversation, an uncomfortable conversation over and over in your head, what are you going to attract? Yeah, of course. Exactly. You're going to get more, not necessarily that person, could be another person behaving the same way. No, you're just going to attract other situations that have that result for you. Is where you're feeling uncomfortable, right? Yeah. Yeah. So Neville says we're closing out the chapter. The past and the present form the whole structure of man. They are carrying all of its contents with it. Any alteration of content will result in an alteration in the present and future. Live nobly, so that mind can store a past well worthy of recall. Should you fail to do so, remember the first act of correction or cure is always revise. If the past is recreated into the present, so will the revised past be recreated into the present. Or else the claim, though your sins are like scarlet, they shall be white as snow, is a lie. And it's no lie. So here we go again. This is the first time I think Neville's used a verse like this in this chapter. Mm-hmm. He's talked about this a lot. When Neville talks about sin, so we're breaking out the decoder ring here. Right. Neville talks about sin. We have an idea of the word sin in our culture that means you did something morally wrong, something repugnant, something, but sin in the original context that Neville is quoting here, the word just means to miss the mark or to miss the target. So imagine shooting an arrow at a bullseye and you don't hit the bullseye. Maybe you don't hit the target at all, right? And this is what happens in a conversation like that, right? When we say, oh, I wish I would have said something different. Yep. I didn't hit the mark. And so he's making a metaphor here that if that missing the mark was like scarlet, it can be changed to be white as snow. And so we can revise the past. And in our imagination, when we start revising things so that they're different, then Neville is telling us that it'll affect the present and it will go on to affect the future. Mm-hmm. Interesting too. He does this little double negative thing going on here toward the end of that one paragraph. He says, "Or else the claim, though your sins are like scarlet, they should be as white as snow, is a lie, and it is no lie." So it's like, oh wait a minute, no, it's negative. No, it's a negation of the negative. No, it's a negation of the negation of the negative. Like, oh.
Right. So
well, what it all adds up to is what you just said. So you can kind of skip all that and just go with what Cindie said. It's a lot easier.
he says the purpose of the story-to-story commentary that follows is to link up as briefly as possible the distinct but never disconnected themes of the 14 chapters into which I've divided the first part of this book. It will serve, I hope, as a thread of coherent thought that binds the whole into proof of its claim. Imagining creates reality. To make such a claim is easily done. To prove it in the experience of others is far sterner. To stir you to use the law constructively in your own life, that's the aim of this book. And so remember at the very beginning of the chapter, he says the law, and then he says imagining creates reality. So we know that's the law that he's talking about. He is stating it. We talk about law of attraction. This is what he's claiming is this law he's talking about, is that our imagination is what's creating our reality. And he is going on, I think, to tell us what the promise is of using that law, and that is the stories that he's going to give us.
And how cool. We get to have stories again from Neville. It's been a while since we had some Neville stories. I mean, Neville does a lot of teaching and he does a lot of explaining, but his stories are magical. So I'm really looking forward to diving into those.
I'm looking forward to it too. And I'm looking at the first one and wondering and knowing that there's no way we can cover it in 7 minutes.
Right.
Shall we start or shall we ask if our crew there has any comments for us?
Well, Jeffrey just gave us, he gave us a big heart and a glass of wine, I think it was. So, you can use the glass of wine to soothe your belly, but.
I'm going to tell you that I did. That's one thing I did last night.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm opening a bottle of wine because this is really painful.
Yeah, sometimes you need to have that pain reliever, right? That's one of those occasions. You don't need it a lot necessarily, but that's one. You just have to kind of distract the mind a little bit.
Definitely felt like it was valid.
I would say so. Well, I'm just glad you came through it relatively whole. And I mean, you talked earlier about how, can you keep a scar from appearing? I think you've already done it. And I think you're going to stay on that mind track and you're not going to have a scar. There's not going to be a scar out of this thing.
Yeah.
In fact, if anything, it's going to be a growth experience rather than a scar,
Well, there's always that story about good luck, bad luck, and you've heard me tell it before, and that's always how I try to look at things. And last night, I think it was a combination. There's an acronym, HALT, HALT, like stop, right?
Right.
And it stands for hungry, angry, lonely, tired.
Right.
And it said that those are not good times to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Big decisions. Make them when you're not hungry, when you're not angry, when you're not lonely, when you're not tired.
Right.
And last night, I think one of the things that was making it harder for me to kind of shake all of that off was that I was really, really tired. Mm. And I know that, right? And I was probably hungry. It was dinner time, and I was tired, and I was...
Well, you just spent a whole day clearing out a room that was just full of all this stuff, and it was now a beautiful room, but that's exhausting. That takes a lot of effort, a lot of work.
Yeah, it did. There was a lot of going up and down ladders and packing boxes and lifting heavy things, and, it was like... So I was so tired that I recognize this from everything I know, life coaching, right, is that everything's going to be fine, and everything's going to be better after you've slept and eaten, and everything's going to be better. And, sometimes you just have to give yourself that and know that life is full of mountains and valleys. Mm-hmm. We can't be too hard on ourselves when we're in the valley, right?
By the way, Jeffrey, in answer to our question, he says, I had a topic earlier, but it sounds like next week it will happen. And he has a smiley face. But feel free to bring it up now. It doesn't mean we can't start talking about it now, Jeffrey, if you want to bring it in. It's up to you.
Right. We're so good at that. We're really good at talking about things and then talking about them again.
Especially on Neville Day. I mean, because Neville Day is like this continuation. It's not where there's a story that begins and a story ends. It just kind of continues from week to week. It just goes on and on and on.
I think my favorite thing about today's reading is the acknowledgement that life is, we only have this one present moment, but we all have a past and a future. So it's a continuation. One day flows into the next. And so with Neville saying everything, and we know this, everything that we've experienced in the past has contributed to whatever we're experiencing in the present.
Right.
So if we can revise the past in our imagination, we can change everything. And I love this so much. And it's funny because I've practiced this for years and yet I forget it. And when I read it right now, I was thinking to myself, I immediately, several situations came up into my mind, the burn being one of them. I thought, oh yeah, why didn't I think of this already?
Yep.
Remember.
Yep. Oh, yeah, he says, okay, I was thinking about polytheism, fairy tales, and Neville Goddard's take on them. We're going to have to do some speculating to come up with an answer to that one, I think. But polytheism and fairy tales, what would Neville's take be about those two topics?
Well, that's interesting because he quotes mainly from a monotheistic religious source. Right? He does a lot of quoting from the Christian Bible. He also quotes some from the Jewish Bible. But I've also heard him quote from texts that were outside of those realms that would probably have more of a polytheistic take. And so I think that Neville talks about everything being one. He definitely talks about the imagination as God. So I'm a little uncertain about whether Neville would have claimed to be monotheistic or not. I don't know. What's your take on it?
I'm going to say that he would accept the idea of polytheism, although he wouldn't necessarily think that way. But he would accept it on the basis of the idea that each one of us, we are all part of the same flow. Yes. We're all part of the same source energy, but we're also individuals at the same time.
That's where I was going, is that he said very clearly that you are God.
Yeah.
Right?
You are God, and I am God, and God. Jeffrey's God, and yeah, we're all God.
Then I think that we've got some polytheistic leaning there.
Absolutely, because at the very minimum, there are a bunch of perspectives going on. There's not just one perspective.
Yeah.
And I think that's the driving force right there. What's the perspective? If everybody has a different perspective, I guess you could argue that God could have multi-perspectives. Okay, maybe that becomes a single God that way. But I could just as easily say, well, it's also polytheistic. Those are all different gods that are all connected together. Depends on how you decide to look at it.
You know what I think is that I don't think it matters.
No, not really.
I say that to say, for people that are listening that come from different backgrounds and have different belief systems, and you hear me say all the time, I like to say I don't believe anything at all. I entertain certain possibilities. But I don't think it matters. I think that you can apply all of this regardless of what your own personal and religious and spiritual belief systems are. I think you can still apply all of this and try it and see.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Give it a whirl. I mean, apply it and see what comes. I don't think that you are breaking any rules by applying this. That's mostly what people are worried about. They're worried that they're going to break a rule somewhere.
That's right. That's true. That is what people worry about. And even though we only have about a minute left, I did want to at least touch on the other part of what he said, because he was talking about fairy tales. And I mean, he's right that is probably a very long topic to discuss. The one thing that I notice most about fairy tales is, first of all, how many of them are drawn from historical perspectives. There are a number of nursery rhymes and fairy tales that have actual physical real world experiences that turned into a fairy tale or into a nursery rhyme.
Fairy tales are full of truths.
They are full of truths, yeah. Yes. And they also often need their own decoder rings. They really do, because you have to know what the metaphors are. Yet otherwise, nursery rhymes in particular, Ring Around the Rosie, when you actually find out what Ring Around the Rosie stands for, you say, oh my God, right. That sounds horrible. How can we be teaching that as a nursery rhyme? So we'll just kind of leave it at that. But yeah, well, that's actually good to bring up sometime. We'll have to talk in more detail about
good question. Thank you.
Fairy tales and their role in law of attraction, because I think there is a law of attraction thing going on there. But more than we can cover in a minute. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. Thank you, Cindie, as usual, for doing your wonderful job of sharing your insights about Neville, because you make this really work. So thank you so much for that.
Oh, you're welcome. I love the discussion.
tell people how they can find Cindie Chavez like our listener did last week?
Yes, they can find me at cindiechavez.com, CINDIECHAVEZ.com. There's a contact form there. I would love to hear from you. Give me a shout.
There we go. So thank you very much. Thank you, Jeffrey, for all your wonderful comments in the live stream. Thank you also to our podcast listeners. All of you, we love every single one of you. We will see you all next time here on LOA Today. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.